Okay, thank you, Tommy Turtle Island. It is Justine joining you today. We have a really exciting interview coming up. Today, we'll be talking to Gregg Deal from the band Dead Pioneers, and we also have the Comrade Kyon on. Would you all like to do brief introductions? We'll start with Kyon and then we'll go to Greg.
Hey everyone, what's up? Kyan Benally, here as a guest host today. Usually I'm behind the camera doing all the clips, the graphics, the images, try to do my best with all that, but Justine requested some help for this one because we did both attend the Dead Pioneers show where I also met Greg and listened to the band for the first time. So yeah, decided to jump on for this and excited just to have a nice conversation, talk about some native music. Greg?
Yeah, hamu nu Gregg Deal minani nu Kyon Takota. My name is Gregg Deal. I'm my people are the Pyramid Lake Paiutes, the Kyu eaters, and yeah, I'm an artist and a dad and a husband, and yeah, the front man of Dead Pioneers.
Amazing. Yes, as Kyan said, we did attend the Albuquerque show last Friday, and I was really excited to meet Greg because I have actually been listening to your music for I would say coming up on a year and a half. I feel like I was like late to the game or something. You gotta let me know when you guys drop that album that has Bad Indian on it. Because one day, I think what happened was Kyan saw a TikTok and it had the song Bad Indian, and we were so just like struck by the lyrics of the song, and I was an instant fan. And I kind of feel like that meme that you see floating around on the internet sometimes, where it's that person in the crowd with a sign that's like your music saved my life, like because because it actually, when I discovered your music, and it actually came to me at a very just wild time. I was thinking back to when I first heard the music. It was actually around the time that the Red Nation had experienced a shooting by Trump supporter Ryan Martinez. He shot our comrade Jacob Johns in the torso. Jacob Johns lived, and Ryan Martinez was he has to be in prison for like a couple more years, but he skipped out on the trial. There's like a danger looming in the distance. That happened, and then 10 days later, the Al Aqsa flood happened, and we were seeing the worst of the Israeli aggression on folks in Gaza. And during all of this time, I was also extremely isolated. I was in South Dakota for a couple months, almost by myself. And your music, like, really was there for me through all of it. And I just have such a deep and genuine appreciation for this. And I have more to say, but I'm wondering if Kyan has anything he would like to express of the sort.
Yeah, definitely. I'll be honest. I didn't listen to Dead Pioneers till the day of the show. I knew you were going to play in Albuquerque. I knew Justine was a big fan. So I just told her, let's check it out. And she was down. I was down. And I got to Albuquerque. I took the train. I was just walking around town, waiting, killing time. And I just, popped in some headphones, listening to your album. And it was cool. It was like, the way I told Justine was like, the vibe was pretty cool. The tunes were cool, but what struck me the most were your lyrics, the content of what you're saying and what you were speaking about. I was like, this is really like relatable, to be honest. It's like, like I feel like as long as you're a native in America and the U.S. borders, I think you'll find anything that's relatable in your lyrics. So that's what I like most about it.
I appreciate that. Justine, I don't think you're late to the game. I mean, that first record was released in September 2023. There was a Bad Indian single that that in the preliminary aspects of this was released in 2021. And it was just a single. It was nothing else. And it was 6 minutes long. The original version of that song is 6 minutes long. And then we ended up getting into a recording studio and spending time making what is the record that's up now. And so the new Bad Indian is sort of the abridged version. It's like the 3 minute long one instead of. I was told you can't have 6 minute long punk songs, and so we we just kind of shortened it up a little bit. But I mean, everything you're saying like validates, what the sort of purpose was. It's really interesting, just sort of the nuanced existence of Native people in America, and in Canada too. Just we are so beholden to the perspective of others and not the reality of our existence. And so that expectation of how we're supposed to present, how we're supposed to talk, how we're supposed to dress, how we're supposed to, look, and all of those things end up pigeonholing us into this monolith, which is just incorrect. That's not what we are. That we are Native people having an American experience, and some of us are from the reservation, and most of us are not from the reservation. Some of us have access to our reservation homes, and some of us don't. Some of us are connected, and some of us aren't. Some of us find way through tradition and ceremony, and some of us find way through politics, the politics of our existence, because to be an American Indian in the United States is to be a political status. And so all of those things sort of culminate into that moment, and the song starts, with this funny moment of essentially not feeling like I'm Native enough, and I think those opening lines are like, I don't have enough beadwork or turquoise, and my last name isn't a sentence, and it's this idea that like we're not Native enough, and even full-blooded Native people have been told like, oh, you don't really look Native, and then that second one being sort of a legitimate interaction that you could probably take from anybody's experience of having somebody question you and ask for the stereotype. They want to know where you're from, how much Indian are you, what's your native name, all the way to the last one, which is filled with just vitriol, the person that makes a passive aggressive and sometimes just aggressive statement questioning the validity of your entire existence, and our reaction as Native people, which I think I like to give people grace. I think we try to do our best, but I also think it's safe to say that most Native people that are aware of who they are, where they are, and what they're dealing with, in their heart of hearts, are angry and pissed off, and so you kind of reach that pinnacle point in Bad Indian. But what's amazing about that song is the number of people that are not indigenous to this continent that feel a way about it, and that they're having a shared experience within the acts of colonialism against identity for people. Like people in Ireland like love what that song does and what it says, because it means other things, but it's a shared experience, a colonial shared experience, which I think is not something that I anticipated, and something that is really humbling to know that this is an experience shared across the world.
Amazing. I have to say, I actually, in all of my social media bios before I discovered this song was like, I actually have Bad Indian as my about me, because I fully claim that I'm a bad Indian. I'm not a good Indian. And I think like I really appreciate how you laid all of that out, because for so many of us, including me, especially me, how I made my way into the movement, into becoming an indigenous socialist with the Red Nation, into advocacy and activism. The thing that brought me to all of this was one big confusion about my identity as an indigenous person, as a child, as a native child. I grew up on the reservation, but there was questions about the church. My mom was boarding school survivor, so are both of my grandparents. That's where they met. And I always had a very big question about how and why we were a part of the church, knowing that it was I mean, my young mind at the time. I mean, I was under the age of 10 when I was having these ideas. I was questioning these things. One day, my grandpa brought home a map which displayed settler colonialism. It shows. I've told this story many times on to our listeners, but basically, it's the map of like Manifest Destiny, where it shows native land becoming reservations, and through the years of US history, showing native land getting smaller and smaller. And the last image on the map is like everything, the United States grayed out with a question mark, as if to imply we don't know if indigenous people are going to continue to exist or not with the existence of the United States. And then second, I really appreciate you laying out the vast, or the many ways that indigenous people exist within the settler colonial project of the US. Because another thing, a fun fact about me is, I'm, blood quantum speaking, I'm full native, but like on paper, I'm actually not native because I don't have enough blood quantum from any of the five tribes that I'm from to actually enroll in any of them. We're working on it now in my adulthood, but I always had this just like deep question of like what it meant to be native. And it wasn't until I discovered the Red Nation in around the time of the No Dapple Standing Rock movement. I saw Nick Estes on TV, on a Vice documentary, laying out settler colonialism and why this was happening at all. And from there, it was just like the lights are on, and I've been part of the movement ever since. But what I really find just striking about your music is you have such a beautiful and poetic way of bringing all of like native history like back to the basics. Like, we know we went through genocide, we know about Manifest Destiny, we know like all of these things, but the way that it is expressed in your music, I'm touched, man. I'm just it's great. I wrote down some of the lyrics. Even in the song Bad Indian, I think the actual first lines are, I'm not a very good Indian, maybe even a bad Indian. And yeah, I just yeah. I'll get into some lyrics later, but I wonder if Kyan has any response to what you just said.
Yeah, no, it's funny you talking about lyrics. I pulled up this last one. You talk a lot about it. It was pretty much like, I think this, what a lot of your music is about identity. And I think particularly within the US, and you also mentioned Canada, I feel like identity is like, I don't know, it's like the one thing you can't escape, like being native right now. I feel like, we're just reduced down to identity, and part of the identity is nothing but performance. But under that, I feel like, you're always speaking to like this idea of like colonialism, capitalism. You don't say it a lot outright in the lyrics, but it's there. And I think one thing for the song Bad Indian I wanted to talk about is at the very end, the very last line, you say, the only good Indian is a dead Indian. Well, I'm a bad Indian and I'm here. I feel like that pretty much sums up like the bad Indian. Of course, it's a popular saying, the only good Indian's a bad Indian. But I think it's kind of ironic that we try to like, I don't know, measure ourselves in terms of identity, but it's ironic that just being in existence is like the full American Indian experience. You know what I'm saying? Just being here is like you don't have to justify any more of your nativeness. Just the fact that you're here is like the only thing you need to prove it, I guess. But that's what I'll say so far with Justine's take on Bad Indian. So it's a fun song. The whole time after the show, me and my friends are just like, "Are you a bad Indian? I'm a bad Indian." Just just talking about that all night, just saying that to each other. It's funny though. It was a great time. I loved it. It was super fun.
Yeah, I think it's such a complicated thing, like I'm a Gen Xer, and so I grew up with those racist Looney Tune cartoons, and Dances with Wolves came out when I was in high school, and like there's all these tropes and all these things that exist, and every last one of those things feeds into the American conscience of indigenous existence. And when we show up as a modern, living, breathing people that are really sort of in at the very least, a duality of our existence. Like, we're native, but we're also just like, having an American experience. That we can sing our songs, but we can also listen to Kendrick Lamar. Like, we have this duality of existence, and we can have all of those things, which to me is very freeing. But I recognize it, like, as we've traversed the social and cultural understanding of America and Americans, that we are oftentimes having to try to overcome who we are, what the perception of who we are is, to the degree of like, we're just now coming out of this place of being apologetic. I know I don't really look Indian, but like, I am, I didn't grow up on the reservation, but like, I still have family that's there. And, these sort of justifications that pop up that really end up taking away our power of who we are, and our ability to be unapologetic with who we are. I think I'd like to think we're all doing our best, and we're all doing our best to figure out who and what we are in the spaces that we occupy. And it's interesting because like all of my kids, they're all enrolled at Pyramid Lake, but like they're all, except for one, pretty white passing. They're going to have a different experience than what I had growing up. I came to understand to be a Native person because that's how I was treated. Because when I was 6 years old, they called me the Prairie N-word, and I understood immediately that I'm not like these other people. How do we find power within ourselves? How do we find grace for ourselves to really not just accept us as we are, but to be empowered by that? Because we've been told, and our parents were told, our grandparents were told, our great-grandparents were told that you're not enough, that you're not divine, that you're not beautiful, that you're not anything other than this thing that we can push to the corners of boarding school and the trauma that comes with those things. And it enters into this new phase where I love people that wear their nativeness out. You've got your land back earrings. Those are dope as hell. And it's like the greatest dog whistle. You see a Native woman, adorned with these beautiful things because we're indigenizing these things. We're wearing those things out. But I'm also in a place where, you guys saw me, the night of the show. I'm essentially wearing like a working class work shirt and a pair of working class pants and some Vans. I'm not wearing beadwork. My hair hasn't been long for a couple of years now. And I don't have anything against those things. I think everybody has to kind of figure out how they're traversing the world. But I'm in this place where I recognize that, when we're going to Europe in May to tour with Pennywise, that if I don't present Native, that I'm immediately challenging everybody's perception of what they think I should be. And I've done enough. Like, I've been an artist for 20 years. I've been in the public eye since 2013. And this band is like just a new thing amidst things. But I've given enough keynote speeches and talks in academia across the United States to know what people want and what they expect. That they expect me to show up in, like, my hair's almost down to my waist and in braids, and I did that for a long time and began to find fatigue in it, not because I didn't love my hair or because I didn't love being able to present outwardly, but because I was also taking on the burden of other people's perceptions in those spaces. So I shaved my hair into a mohawk, something that I could grow out the back. I could do a proper, mullet mohawk, maybe a Pawnee style, braid the back, leave the middle, but to do something and recognizing that within the perception of the expectation of Native people, that long hair is tolerated and other Native adjacent haircuts like a mohawk, are not as tolerated. In fact, they're quite confrontational, and you have to deal with this. So I'm speaking at a college in Pennsylvania. It was it was like a religious college, so all the like the dean of students was literally a priest in robes, and I show up with my hair, and I didn't tell anybody. I just showed up like that, and they're like, "Oh, okay," but I'm about to say the same things that I would say if my hair was long, and so I'm in this space where it's like recognizing all these things, loving all these things. And by the way, I have a lot of beadwork, unbeknownst to, the song denotes that I don't. I actually have a lot. But I'm in this space where I realize that my very presence can challenge the status quo, the expectation of my existence. And that's where I am right now. But it also is in that space, which I think is also important to acknowledge, that there's a lot of people that are trying to figure out how to present, how to assert themselves, how to assert the authority in their own indigeneity, how to assert their own identity, and that identity doesn't necessarily mean you have to wear feathers in your hair. It can actually be a number of different things, and that there's beauty in us knowing who we are and being able to find ways to navigate that. And it's all legitimate. All of it's legitimate. And yeah, I'm not sure why I got on that tangent. I think Bad Indian is so much about being in this place of like, and the line is in there, just like I'm a Native person having an American experience, and I've been exploring what that means while simultaneously being just personally frustrated with those expectations.
Yeah, man. I can relate to so much of what you just said right now. I've also had my own personal trials and with how I even look. I've gotten the comment plenty of times, well, you don't look native, or even the whole like, well, you're such and such for a native person. I don't know, I've gotten some really like messed up comments, but also reminds me of like my how I present like as a woman. Before I was politicized, I was very much like on the, and this was like around 2016, which for a lot of my ladies out there know was like the makeup boom. And so I was very much like into sort of doing all that, and this is like pre-feminism for me, so I felt like a lot of it was like pandering to the male gaze. And there was a moment of like letting go of all of that once I became politicized. I allowed myself to stop the use of a prescription drug that I was using, which I gained like 40 pounds, but it was so liberating to like let go of my physical appearance, like as a woman. I don't know, it reminds me of that, talking about all of this, how you physically appear. And then only in recent times have I been able to like come to a place where I'm like wholly like accepting of myself and things like that. But also too, I think that like um it's really interesting talking about how you went through this journey of being presentable to the public like as an indigenous person, because I actually just got done watching a couple of your TED Talks on YouTube, and I was like, whoa, I didn't know you were all braided out like back then. And but to hear that journey that you've gone through is just really inspiring. I understand what you mean by that. And um maybe we can even go into a little bit of what you're doing before Dead Pioneers. But before we do that, I also was um let's see. Well, actually, I'm not sure which way to go with it, because I'm just now finding out that Dead Pioneers is actually like incredibly recent to this like greater career of like art and what I perceive as like a level of activism. Because in your TED Talks you're talking about these bounty tags and creating art with them. You're also making commentary on like indigenous boarding schools. Um maybe it would be nice to hear about how you began your career as an artist, commenting on these things, and how that led to the beginning and creation of the band Dead Pioneers.
Yeah. Wow. Well, so I went to my wife is from Washington D.C. So when we both moved back, she just had graduated college, and then we moved back to D.C. And then I went to school there. I was 24 when I started college, and I went to George Mason University, and gosh, that was 1999. And then when I was out of school, I started working at the National Museum of American Indians, so the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. I worked there in 2004, the inaugural year that it opened. But in that time, when I was in school, I was doing artwork, and I was sort of following this idea of being a native artist and discovering other artists that were creating work that resonated with me. The biggest one being James Luna, who's a Luiseño performance artist, and really being enamored with his work as a performance artist. And I was not interested in performance art, but for him, I was interested in his voice. It was so unapologetically indigenous, and I think when I was in college, I was trying to figure that out, but it was contrived. Like I was basically doing what I thought I was supposed to be doing in order to be a native artist, and we get into those spaces, I think, as native people, that we end up doing what we think that we should be doing or what's expected of us, and sort of pigeonhole ourselves into doing just that thing, and then finding out, at some point that that you don't have to do it that way, or that there's other ways to do things that can benefit your own understanding, within yourself and your community. But after school, I was working at the Indian Museum. And then in 2005, I won a mentorship through the Ford Foundation, and I went to Venice, Italy, to the Venice Biennale, which is this huge art thing that happens about every other year or so, with James Luna. So a year after really discovering his work, I'm actually in Venice, Italy with James. And it just opened my eyes to ideas and thoughts and the power of performance. James had famously said that performance art is one of the most important mediums to Native people because it gives us power in real time. We can move, we can change, we can adjust the narrative as people see it, as opposed to a painting that's on the wall, which still has power and still has merit, but oftentimes people are not informed by what they see, but instead bring their own information to what they're looking at, and their minds may or may not be changed by that. But in performance art, you can actually change things. And so fast forward a little bit, I had created a performance piece. It was called The Last American Indian on Earth in 2013, very tongue-in-cheek. And essentially, I was embodying the stereotype. I bought regalia that either came out of a kit for Boy Scouts or some shit like that, headdress that was assembled in China, and like all this stuff that just is over the counter. Anybody could buy it. And I had this idea of essentially a social experiment that if I wore this, that Americans are so inept at what a Native person is that they would react to me as a Native person, even though I'm not dressed in real regalia. And then I would document the way that they would talk to me and the way that they would interact with me. And part of this was also sort of my own sort of wielding something that I grew up with to weaponize it in this strange little artistic way. And it sucked. I honestly and truly hated it. Going out into public in this stuff was really difficult. But when we began to find the way that people were reacting and interacting with this character, I began to realize that the performance was not me. It was everybody else. And Americans, after working at the Indian Museum, I already knew how people would react and interact, and they rise to the occasion of their own misunderstandings. It's wild. And I did that for a year and gained some national press, and it allowed me to sort of branch out and begin to sort of think about what all these things mean. Because I'm of the belief that we oftentimes look at art as being a product, and whether that product sells or whether it just statically sits, it's ultimately a product. And I was trying to move through my own work as a process of exploring different ideas, whether it's expectations or stereotype or anything else. And it was this kind of interesting space of, I'm being criticized by non-native people, of course, but I'm also being criticized by native people. And it becomes this interesting space of realizing that we as a people have a variety of thoughts of what we think, how things should be done, how they shouldn't be done, how we justify that, how we move, how we work. And I think it's really important in recognizing, how different we as a people think, because the rest of America oftentimes think that we all think the same thing, and that's just not the case. And while all that's happening and doing that piece with stereotype, I ended up in the discussion of the mascot debate in Washington, D.C. And that mascot debate ends up going national in that moment. I had done some stuff in college about the mascot debate because I was head of the Native student organization and ended up with newspaper articles and stuff in the school newspaper. And then here we are, like, in this moment where Twitter is taking off and it's enabling activists to do incredible things and say incredible things. And it's creating almost a democratic process of information. And so people are talking about things that have never been talked about on a national level. It was just incredible. And I ended up being one of probably a dozen faces on this discussion. And it was also tied into that performance piece, because as that performance piece was going, this discussion was happening. I kind of got sucked in to it as a result, where it's like, okay, I have to have an opinion about this thing. But it was all like happening at the same time, and ended up being thrust into like actual activism discussions about stereotype and identity, cultural appropriation, and everybody was just doing so much work at the same time to get all this information out, and it was kind of incredible. And that put me in a lot of positions to sort of have discussions about that stuff, but also put me in some positions where I started realizing that there are opportunists in the activist space that want to use those things for significant gain and for their own clout. And I found myself pulling back from that. I want to be an artist. I don't want to be an activist. And an activist in America means a whole lot of different things. And so I will oftentimes say I'm a disruptor, because I can do that for free. Activism ends up having this whole other sort of monetary thing that's attached to it that might be associated with another person. And I'm truly not interested in that. I'm interested in making work. If it fits in those activist spaces, I accept that. I talk about my experience, my own thoughts, my own feelings about things. If that speaks to somebody's shared experience, I accept that. I accept the responsibility of that. But I am interested in making art that is inherently true. I'm not interested in talking for the people, not for my people, not for Indian country at large, because I don't think that that's a fair thing to do. I don't think it's a fair space to be in. And as we discuss all these things, as we talk about art, or as we talk about activism, or as we talk about political existence, as we talk about socialism, as we talk about Palestine, as we talk about colonialism, like all of these are different ideas. And I think it's important for people to have access to all of those ideas in any medium possible, so that they can come to their own understanding of what's true and what's not true, and hopefully find their own value in the middle of it. But my artwork, I have performance pieces that sit in these spaces of I suppose an activist voice, but also artwork that sits in a space of disrupting. And that's all it's meant to be. That's all it's ever meant to be, is art. And I feel, for my people, and I think for most people's people, artists are in some way medicine people. There are things that are attached to it that ultimately somebody might see it or hear it or experience it, and it helps them feel a way about it. And there's something magical about that. I wish I could express in English how incredibly humbling that is, and how incredibly powerful that is. Because as I'm making this work, I'm also somebody that's had a lot of trauma in their life, and I'm doing the best I can. And I know the best I can do is not necessarily good enough for somebody else. But I'm doing the best I can. And I can tell you, man, there is some shit that I've figured out because I can't afford a therapist, but I've worked through it in just being aware that there's something there, and being aware that taking those things, applying it to my work, applying it to ideas, applying it to being open to create, has given me quarter to find a semblance of peace with all of the shit that's happened for our people. And I think about how I grew up, and I think about my parents, and I think about our connection to Pyramid Lake, and I think about my own children and how they perceive me, and I think about the work that I want to create. It's all just kind of this amazing thing, but also like it scares me. And I think that's important. The work scares me, and saying things out loud scares me, because I want peace. And if I know, especially right now, if I say something about Gaza being free, I'm not going to be given peace in that space, because the colonial machine is not going to allow that to happen. That if I say that Elon Musk did a Nazi salute, I'm not going to find peace in that. So we know that saying things that are true ultimately can take away from us our peace. And so there has to be a push and pull and an awareness of that so that we can find peace. I feel very fortunate. I've been married for 26 years. I have 5 children, and we have a beautiful family life that I just didn't have growing up. And I feel so lucky because I can pull away and I can spend time with, my little ones, especially. And that provides something else. But I'm compelled to create. So in answer to how that turns into Dead Pioneers, I did a performance piece in 2019 called the Punk Pan-Indian Romantic Comedy. It was about how I grew up, how important music was growing up. My white father was an old hippie, and my native mother was more into pop. And so I had this incredible musical education growing up. And my father was also this incredible musician. He was deaf in one ear, but he was one of these guys that could hear something once and pick up a guitar and just play it. And he had no patience for me as a young person, and never taught me anything. But I always had this thing, and they never gave me a hard time about the music that I listened to, which was very much in that space of hardcore punk rock, straight edge, mostly in Salt Lake City. And I grew up in Park City, which is a ski resort town about 40 miles east of Salt Lake. And it was just this interesting place where the music informed everything. And when my father asked me to leave when I was 17 years old, I had to abandon everything. And I never stopped listening to this music, but I also had to survive and kind of work through this stuff. And once I got into my 40s, I was like realizing that I had this trauma, but also realizing that while I never stopped listening to it, I don't know really how much I was really, really listening to this music. And it gave me, my wife, one day gave me sort of inadvertently permission to jump back in. And while that was happening, I was creating art that was around it. And I was doing these I was reappropriating old comic book images from the 40s and 50s. And I started replacing the dialogue of these images with lyrics from punk rock songs that sound like the indigenous struggle or that relates somehow to that. And I redrew all these images. So the natives are all winning, or they're making a strong statement. Or if there's a native person who's standing in the same frame as a colonialist, that the native person is a little bit taller. And just like these little subversive things that I'm creating, And it's giving me an opportunity to deep dive into the music, but also recognizing that my father, who passed in 2015, that there's this other thing that I was given inadvertently, and that there's power in it. There's power in music. So I would tell this story. I had a one-man show, and I would talk about how I grew up, talk about losing my best friend when I was a teenager, how much that messed me up, and how I've reached this point where the music means something so much. And gosh, it would be really cool if I could make some music that could fit this performance piece and sort of, work through it. Because the performance was basically vignettes, and I'd have these segues of music. So I'd like talk about my dad and then play like a Minor Threat song. And then I would talk about my friend Coleman who died. And then I would play like a Rage Against the Machine song or something. So it was all these relations. So I got a grant to expand it and to make music. And I got a bunch of instruments with the grant. And I wanted the instruments in the house so my kids had access to them as well. And then COVID hit and everything shut down. And so we were just trying to, I connected with a couple of guys and we were trying to write. And I was a little gun shy on really, being the lead of this band. And we were trying to create something and we just weren't quite sure what we were doing. My bassist, Lee, who's in this other band called Algiers out of Atlanta. And I found myself at a residency in Florida, and Lee was also in that residency. And we came together. It was like a 3-week long residency. And we came together and he was like, we should collaborate. He knew my work. He knew all these things. And I said, well, I'm trying to work on this thing that's supposed to be sort of like spoken word with like punk riffs instead of like ambiance or jazz. And I wrote this thing yesterday and I think it's kind of interesting. And I gave it to him and I read through it to him and he was like, that's cool. And where we were doing the residencies, there's different buildings for, different mediums. So we went in their music studio and we set up a bass guitar and we pulled in another musician and he was playing the drums and we figured out the riff, we figured out the pace, we pressed record, and we recorded Bad Indian. And all of that, and the original Bad Indian was recorded, and it was arranged and recorded in less than 2 hours. And the recording, that original recording, is the first recording. We did it 2 or 3 times. And I took that back to the guys I was working with, which at the time is my drummer, Shane, and my guitarist, Josh, one with the mustache. And I said, this is what it is. This is what I want to create. And everybody was like, lights on. Oh, okay, that makes sense. And so I started writing. They started sending me riffs. I raised some money. I pulled us all together so that we could write for 3 days. I'd had a solo exhibition in Denver. And then on Sunday, we get together. And on Monday, we start writing, right? We get into a studio. We're writing for 8 hours. And at the end of that 8 hours, I'm like, man, I don't feel very good. I take a test and I'm positive for COVID. So we had to stop everything. But on that day, we wrote something like 8 songs. And it was just this magical moment of like taking everything I've written and putting riffs to it and working through it and figuring it out. We were supposed to record right after that. We didn't. We were going to record at the Blasting Room, which is owned by the drummer of the Descendants, Bill Stevenson. And we were trying to, we couldn't get it scheduled because I had to raise more money to fly out Lee and Josh, because Josh was in Colorado and then he took a job in Indiana over COVID. But I was able to finally get everybody together and we were finally going to record. We had rescheduled 2 or 3 times. We're finally going to record. Josh has a death in his family. He's like, I can't make it. I have to go be with my family, of course. And Lee, who is supposed to be there, also had an emergency. He's like, I got to go, but I'll email you our bass riffs. So I'm like, this sucks. So it's just me and Shane and we don't have a guitarist. So I begged Shane. I was like, there's got to be somebody who can just, the guitar riffs are already established. There has to be somebody who can just learn them and play them. And so he made some calls. The guy had about 2 days, but he figured it out. He showed up at the blasting room. It was a snowstorm. It was in February 2023. And he showed up and he played and he was great, to the degree that I'm having a conversation with the rest of the guys being like, should he be in the band? And we all agreed that he should. And that's Abe, who's our other guitarist. And all this was put together sort of on a whim. And when we recorded that first record in 2 days. So we wrote it in a day. We recorded it in 2 days. We were on a shoestring budget and it all came together. And that's the first record. That's the first thing that we did. We released that record in September 2023. By February 2024, we had over 500,000 streams on Spotify. And that garnered us some attention, and we got a record deal that we signed in April. And then we got together and wrote our second record in 2.5 days and recorded it in 4 days in June. And so now we have a second record that's coming out. And everything, it's interesting because that first record, so much, you can tell listening to it, like it's a little bit of a mess. It's a little bit of lightning in a bottle. It's a little bit of like, we're just trying to make this happen, and it somehow works. And listen, my musicians are talented, but they're all behind it too. They're all like, they're hearing the lyrics, like Tired. It's just like that first line, America's a pyramid scheme and you ain't at the top. And it goes into this place of recognizing racism and homophobia and transphobia and ableism and elitism and classism and all these. And my guys are like, yeah, we're all on the same page. And it has allowed us to say quiet things out loud. And now where we are right this second politically, it seems like a proper time to say those quiet things out loud. Everybody, all of us who are sort of even casually saying things on social media to counter the political shitstorm that we're in and have been in for the last while now, saying things out loud seems to matter. And it's kind of exciting because we're just saying the things that you guys are saying, but we have a musical melody behind it, and you know, makes it catchy, I guess. But that was a really long answer to your question about, you know, the art and everything. But it's all tied together. In fact, with Dead Pioneers, you're going to start seeing more of the visual arts coming out and being accompanied with the music. And I'm kind of excited for it. I'm here for it.
Hell yeah, Greg. Thank you so much for the origin story. That was a beautiful story to listen to. I I'm a little bit of a loss for words because there's just so much going through my head as you're talking. Before I ask anything new, I'm wondering what Kyon's response to all of this is. He hasn't said anything in a minute.
Well, I'm just listening too, but no, it's funny. It's funny. You talk about. I really wanted to mention your performance art. You talked about the last American Indian on Earth, and I want to bring that up because was about 2014. I'm a millennial. You know, you talked about you're a Gen Xer, just out my age like that, and it was about that time where I was also kind of like learning about Native identity, you know, what it means to be Native. And of course, at that time, I was also going to college. And I bring this up because while we were at the show, we went with another friend and he was listening to it, you know, and I was talking to him afterwards and he's like, yeah, it's pretty common. He's like, the stuff he's talking about, it's kind of like American Indian 101. And I was like, yeah, I guess so. I was like, yeah, I still think there's more depth to it, but I can see that. And so that parallel there, and then listening to you talk about that. And I was, like I said, I was learning more about nativeness, Indianness, and your performance actually came up in the stuff I was looking at. And I was like, oh, I just think it's funny how it came full circle. I saw your first performance art and then now listening to your music. And I say that now too, because I also think I have a passion for music. And I say I think because lately, it just hasn't really been the same. I don't know really what it is, but I think music is like really important. Like you said, it's like another avenue of expression that you can't get through like other means. You know, sometimes a good song will just make you feel a certain way, regardless of like whether you agree with it or not. So yeah, and then there's also points in my life too, and I was listening to all kinds of music. One time I had a realization that, dang, I listen to a lot of like white guys. So I pulled back and I started to listen to more stuff. And yeah, I just really love me some good like Indian music, you know. I love me. I just like, how would I say this? I love listening to music that's just done by native folks, not like native music. You know what I'm saying? I just love music that happens to be done by native people, because that usually turns out to be like the best kind of music sometimes. And and you're talking about like how you kind of been like thrust. It's weird because like I made this, when you look native, it automatically like asserts this level of authority, you know, like just because you have a braid, now you can talk about like oil rights, land rights. You can talk about you just become like an authority in a weird way. So in many ways, that kind of happened to me too, you know, like I started organizing and you talked about your hair. I have a funny story about my hair. I never like was like, oh, I want to grow my hair out because that's what natives do. I just literally had a bad haircut one time and I, and I shaved it all off and I just stopped getting haircuts. And now it's like a core part of who I am, you know. I'm always wearing my hair in a bun. It's just, I wear silver. I don't really wear turquoise. It's like my own way I came to terms with like expressing my nativeness, you know. But ultimately, I think it's just interesting how you got into activism. I'm also at odds with the term activist. I feel like activist is like something people love to be labeled as, where I'm like, no, I'm not an activist. Don't call me an activist. But like you, in many ways, I don't really want to be speaking about this stuff. I make an active effort to not really like be on the podcast. I'd rather be behind the scenes, just helping people. And I don't know, I guess for me, I just, in many ways, just listening to you kind of seems like you're just like speaking your own truth, and there's like a level of like, I don't know, love for your people, whatever community you came from, you know. And it seems like this is also kind of in there. It's kind of like just speaking to people who might need to hear it at the time. I can imagine this being something I would have listened to on repeat when I was also going through this period of trying to find like what it means to be native and stuff like that. But yeah, just a lot of parallels to what you say and what you feel, you know, like, so I'll say that much for now. It's pretty cool listening. I also love me some good lore background, you know. I love that. So thanks for sharing all that.
I'll say that I say this usually, and I'm surprised I didn't say it. That what one person calls an activist, another might call an adult with an opinion. It really is like who's speaking, you know, like that's all that it is. But you know, I want to point out, because you know we played last Friday in Albuquerque, and we've played not a lot of shows. We play, just somehow we're able to come together really well and really easily as a band. And so like we played one of our new songs that's going to release next Thursday, which is called Post American. It was the last song we played. We've never played that live, and we only practiced it twice when we showed up. And it just seems to be kind of how we work. We're able to kind of make work together. And we've done a lot of shows where there's been a lot of native people that shows up. There's something very different about being in Albuquerque where more than half the room is filled with native people. And every last one of us, we talked about afterwards, we're just like, holy hell, that was so incredible. Like there was something just incredibly special about being in a group, in a room full of native people, and feeling that moment and being able to say things that aren't just words that are hanging out there, that maybe they're teaching some non-native person an idea or a perspective, but that you're saying it as a collection of shared experiences and ideas that is just completely unreal. Like I don't know that I've ever felt more filled and more humble than after that show. And it went in understanding my people are not from that area, so I'm a guest. I'm in somebody else's homelands, but feeling so welcomed into that space and having those ideas, those feelings, the feelings that we've all had since we were little to now, and having them sort of validated in a moment sharing a moment together, man, that was just absolutely overwhelming. And I am confident I will never feel that again unless I'm in a room full of Native people. And it's just really incredible and really special. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know why things are happening the way they're happening. I'm going with it. I'm grateful, but I'm doing my best. I have no earthly idea what's happening. and and I don't know why. Like, I mean, I started writing in 2014, and somehow that's translated to me being able to write songs. And I still write. I have notebooks I've kept for years, and now it's translating into songs. And it's such a beautiful thing, but also it's so overwhelming. And my wife is more pragmatic about it. You know, we start doing a band and it's on Spotify, and we're all in our 40s. All of us are. And my wife's like, what are you doing, man? Like, never made music before. And I'm over here like writing stuff and doing stuff. But we looked at it, I looked at it like another medium. It's another medium, and it's interesting. And I can say things and do things I can't do with anything else. But it also has this other thing attached to it that is just inherently really, I think it's really beautiful. I'm so constantly overwhelmed by it. I really and truly am. And so I appreciate your words, and it brings the feelings that I have to the forefront, you know, because it just really is this incredible thing. I cannot wait for you guys to hear the next record. There's stuff on there that is wild. We wrote a whole song about John Wayne and Kevin Costner, and it is unapologetic. It is not nice, but like it's true, right? I mean, these two individuals have had such an impact on people's perception of us, and yeah, that sucks. So yeah, we're doing all the things.
Oh, we know all about Kevin Costner and John Wayne and on the Red Nation podcast. Greg, that's so awesome. I am so excited. I'm also really happy to hear about your reaction to the Albuquerque show. Albuquerque's a real special place. Like almost the majority of the tribes in the US are represented in Albuquerque. There's upper 400 tribes officially represented there. Also, big shout out to Weed Rat, who is actually the band who made the song of the Red Nation podcast intro that we use for almost every single episode. That was my first time seeing them, actually, and I really had to give Becky big props for all of that too. There was also another local band who I hadn't heard before, Los Mocos. They were dope. They were awesome. But yeah, that was an amazing show. A lot of like a lot of the local activist scene was there. I felt like too. There was it was an amazing crowd. It was an amazing night, and y'all need to come to Albuquerque more. I'm gonna hook you up with. I need to see you during Indian Market Weekend, disrupting the space with your just genuine lyrics. I need you at the Native Guitars Tour show, and really like bringing it, because one of the big questions that I had, and we're coming up at time. Um, I don't know. Sina also asked us if we could get maybe like 10-15 minutes of bonus content. So maybe we'll save this the question for that. But yeah, actually yeah, let's save that question for that. Um so for our listeners who are not a part of the Patreon, who are just um part of our regular base, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. I have one more question for Greg. If you want to hear this question, please sign up for our Patreon, and of course continue to support the show. We still have up our GoFundMe, and thank you for supporting our work. We'll see y'all next time. So the next question I actually have is I was wondering how you feel about native art, because as I mentioned, Indian Market Weekend, it's actually because the border town of Santa Fe is actually one of my pueblos. It's our border town. That's like my hometown basically. And so I grew up around Indian market. I grew up seeing the sort of like fancy fine arts that's marketed for the settler gaze. The entire market itself was set up to drive tourism to Santa Fe, to believe in this like multicultural identity of a city, to what we call in the Red Nation, the city of Santa Fe is actually like Pueblo Disneyland. And yeah.
That's
Yeah,
rad.
and Indian market every single year. I mean, every single year the Swaya Indian market just really just drives that home. But in recent years, we've actually been participating in the alternative market called Pathways, which is actually set up um, by actual Pueblo tribe, Pewaukee Pueblo, to really just like a market by and for Native people. So I feel like there's this like duality of like Native art happening on this big Indian market weekend, and it actually and then too, I have to admit, in the past, I have had sort of like an attitude while figuring out my feelings on how I feel about these different Native artists. And now I come to a point where I actually have a really huge soft spot for Native art and Native artists, and especially just coming upon your art. I'm wondering, what are your ethics as I mean, and you did go over this a lot already, but do you have like any specific ethics of how you create your art as a Native person?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's been a process for sure. There was, I think, a moment that was pretty popular in the smaller sort of native art markets of using the old, Ed Curtis photos, old men in headdresses, and kind of gone that route. And I participated in that a bit. There was actually two artists. It was myself and Cheyenne Randall, who were kind of using that kind of stuff, and then it sort of took hold and ended up becoming sort of a status quo in native art scenes. I think native art it's so complicated because there's people that want to participate, and they want to matter, who've realized that the Western buyers market is almost exclusively white. And so you almost have to create work that is familiar to that colonial gaze. And that's why you end up with paintings of cowboys and Indians. And that contemporary native art, which is very clearly, on the rise. But, in the early 2000s and 2010s, were given no quarter in those spaces, not the same way. Like, we look at George Morrison, we look at what's his name? I just totally blanked. You look at these other contemporary artists from the abstract expressionist movements were native, that were in that space, and they're sort of an anomaly in that space. And my understanding, and I am more than happy to say that I am wrong in my understanding, realizing that I'm perceiving something. My understanding up until recently was that the art market was specifically reliant on that Western buyers market. And I reached a point where I wasn't interested in creating work that was going to be recognizable to the colonial gaze. I wanted to create something else. I'm currently in this moment of taking some of those old Americana pieces and allowing them to be in spaces that I'm currently painting right now, that are a mix of abstract and a mix of being on point, using typography to sort of make statements and allow things to just sort of exist in spaces, oftentimes using textiles from my tribal community, symbology and things that exist in that, and have become a lot more sensitive to generalizing images, like those old Ed Curtis images, within my work. I want to use stuff that's specifically from my tribal community coupled with things that live in a very general Americana space and challenge the perceptions of those things. And so, like, I have an illustrative style where it'd be like a cowboy, he's lighting a cigarette and doing something to it on canvas to sort of counter what you're looking at, or to take that same sort of two-color illustrative style of a bottle that just looks like an old-timey bottle, but then writing on the bottle, America KKK dream, and trying to counter those things with something. So the familiarity of those images draw you in, and then I'm challenging, that perception with something that's subversively in that space, which is all just sort of a challenge in trying to recognize how I see myself, how I grew up seeing myself, but also grounding myself in these textiles that are from my tribe. I think the market is really hard. I think there's clearly more room for more contemporary works. There's efforts to create quarter for that. Oddly enough, my experience with Santa Fe art market has been that there's the people who are pushing some of the contemporary stuff have been non-native. And I don't know if that's still the case, but in this window of time that I was looking at sort of participating, that's what I saw. And I was like, I don't really want to do that. But also, it goes back to Bad Indian, right? Like I don't belong. I don't have the right last name. I'm not from the right community. I didn't go to the right school. I don't have the right connections to be invited into those spaces or to be given quarter in those spaces. And this goes into a whole other place beyond sort of the white gaze of realizing that we sometimes police ourselves with these restrictions and this idea that you're not Native enough because of where you're from and because of your last name or because of how you appear or because you didn't go to IAIA, and so all these things play into that as well. And if you do have all those things, if you go to that school, if you have that name, if you're from a community, like, that's awesome. I think everybody's got to do what they got to do. But I can tell you for myself, I've never been in those spaces because I've never been invited in those spaces, or I've never really felt welcome in those spaces. And so I just make work that just goes out. I'm not opposed to being in those spaces ever. But I also am not going to force my way into a space that I'm not welcome to be in. And that doesn't also mean that I don't have beef with anybody. I think there's some great Native artists out there doing some great work. And I think that Native artists are getting opportunities and are doing things and putting their truth out there, their films, their music, I think that's great. I don't have to like you to support that you are doing great things. I think that's awesome. And so it's a strange place because I've been in this enough to know that there's people that don't like me and that there's people that do. And I can't really do anything about that except just make work and do my best. But I'm legitimately stoked about everybody and what they're making, unless they're making something that's hurtful to our communities, to our identities, or to any other people. I'm not okay with that. But I think the contemporary Native art space is growing, and it needs to continue growing, and it needs to break past Santa Fe into every corner of the art world. We don't need to be a niche market anymore. We need to be in the art spaces that were not built for us so that we can continue to push forward.
Awesome. Amazing, Greg. Thank you. We actually have one more question from our producer, Sina. He was talking about how the music industry has changed a lot in the last 20 years, and he was actually wondering what you would have to say about whether those changes have been good or bad for Native musicians.
I mean, the music industry in the United States is oversaturated through streaming, and a lot of those services don't benefit musical artists at all. And so if an independent musician is striking out, trying to find it, that's incredibly difficult. You take somebody who's from a marginalized group, even more so. I'm finding out that the music industry in the UK and throughout the European Union, totally different. They are still reliant upon radio. They're still reliant upon record sales and charts that are essentially open to whoever's making whatever to like get eyes on their things. In the United States, everything's manufactured. It's hard to get into those charts. It's hard to get into those spaces. We clearly have Dead Pioneers clearly has a trajectory, and I believe that that trajectory is informed by a nearly 20-year visual art career. So, you know, we're opening for Pearl Jam, but a lot of that has to do with the fact that I know Jeff Ament, their bassist, who bought a painting from me in 2019 before Dead Pioneers even existed. And when we made Dead Pioneers, I sent him some stuff, not because I wanted something from, and I made that very clear. I don't want anything from you. I just thought you would appreciate this. I just want you to hear it. And it's turned into something else. And so it becomes about networking and maybe who you know or whatever else. Like I said, I don't know why things are going the way that it's going, because there's some pretty cool indigenous bands out there that I think deserve quarter. But as we look at the Trump administration, I think he's a great example of the very painful but true fact that deserve has nothing to do with it. It just doesn't, and it ends up being luck and connections and who you know and what's happening, and we'll see. But all of that said, like we're broke, like we're still working, we're still all like our whole band is working class. We don't have a lot of money. We're doing our best to get to this place or to that place. The reason why we don't do a ton of little shows everywhere is because it costs money to drive, it costs money to get a hotel, it costs money to eat food. We all have families and jobs and responsibilities. We're not teenagers that, you know, can live in a car. We're like grown ass adults that have to fulfill these responsibilities and therefore have to pick and choose. But the music industry in the United States is, it's tough. It's really tough. You know, you got to write a song that has a hook that can live on social media so people can use it as their background music or so they can perform it on TikTok. You know, record companies are not interested. Like, we had to go to a record company in the colonists' country to get a record deal because we couldn't get something here, you know, and I know that's not always the case. You know, Nicholas Gallinan's band, you know, they were able to get something with Sub Pop, which is really awesome. But there's other bands that are not getting those things, and so it's really confusing and really hard. All of that said, we don't have a booking agent or a manager here in the United States. We've been trying to secure one, and that's been really tough. But we have one in Europe. And so there's clear things happening in Europe that are not happening here. And hopefully that changes. I think we're hearing more music-led stuff and less overproduced stuff. I mean, there's some great artists out there doing, you know, that have great voices, but they're also becoming part of these recording companies, machines, and like, you know, there's PR efforts and everything else. But we're starting to hear real music, and we're starting to hear real content in real music. Between native bands and just unapologetic feminist queer bands, you know, that are just doing badass stuff. There's a local band here in Denver called Cheap Perfume. They have a song called It's Okay to Punch Nazis. It's great. I love Idols. I love Mannequin Pussy. I love, you know, all these bands that are just all on the up and up. And they're doing all the things. And I've been to these shows and they are very well attended. So maybe we're gaining quarter for old music again. Maybe we get to have another Nirvana moment where this music matters beyond these giant arena shows with, you know, artists that have great voices, but clearly have way more resources than a little band like ours has.
Amazing. Yeah, there's definitely some kind of like native art renaissance happening, I feel like. Even in like the literary sense too. I remember having this a similar conversation with Ramona Emerson, Danette author. And man, I just appreciate all of that. I appreciate the work. I appreciate like going back to, I don't know, kind of was saying something that kind of struck the comment I wanted to make earlier. Um about how, and we're saying how it the lyrics in nature are expressing sort of like a back to the basics political analysis of indigenous identity and existence. But I have heard so many political speeches. We have the Red Nation has written the Red Deal. We've said all of these things, but yet the poetry in actual art and music is like something that is I don't know about missed, but it's definitely, I find the music and the lyrics like a sort of like medicine. It's like it's rev fuel for me. And it's just so hard to find an expression that just really captures the like the grief and the anger in such a proper way. I even wrote down like we continue to walk like a ghost in a graveyard of our 1,000-year home. I look like a stranger out here no matter where I continue to roam. And like just like all of these like battle lyrics, we could go through all of them, but we don't have enough time. But I just have like a sincere appreciation for this conversation. Even Cena, who's in the background, he's sending me messages about how amazing this conversation has been. Thank you so much, Greg, for all of this. Kyan, do you have any closing thoughts or questions? Anything that you would like to add?
I do before you shut me out of the conversation.
No,
Just
I'm
kidding.
not doing that.
No, no. It's a commentary on like you talked about art, the art scene. I've always been at odds with artists as well. Maybe only people who like produce art, like you talk about, that's like palatable, art that's like, I feel like the art that I'm criticizing is just art that's like stuff people that are okay to consume, it doesn't really like push the boundaries or nothing like that. But I was also thinking about this idea you talked about, I don't have no beef with nobody. I was making this dumb little joke in my head earlier. I was like, maybe we got to decolonize our diets and get rid of the beef. But but I want to say a comment on your approach to creation, because I guess at the bare bones of it, creation is like something powerful. And I feel like you're very careful with like what you create, what you put out there. You're not just like throwing this all out there to be cool, to be edgy. You're just like, you're very precise with what you're doing. You like draw from your experience, you like draw from like your intuition and everything like that. And I guess I just appreciate that you're careful with the stuff you create, because it's kind of going to be around for a while. And my last thing I wanted to say was I wanted to shout out your logo. I'm a big fan of of burning wagons, so I like your choice for the burning wagon.
Thank you. Yeah, I made that and I love it. I appreciate that. What you see is what you get. There's not a whole lot more to me than just what I'm saying. And it's interesting because I think we oftentimes we perceive other Native people. We might perceive slights. We might perceive voice. We might perceive intent in different ways. Honestly and truly, I just want to create work, and I want to be able to take care of my family. My family is the most important thing. I know I'm making something, and I know it's going out in the world, and I know that when I'm gone, it might still live on. But my concentration is not me. My concentration is my family, my children, because my purpose isn't to make good art or to make music or to do all those things. I feel humbled to be able to do these things, and I feel humbled that those things get to exist. But my purpose is to do my best to create something that allows my children to have more peace than I have had in my life. My purpose is to make sure that they have something so that they can live and breathe and be who they deserve to be. And I'm hoping that that's happening. And I think that making space for everybody as best I can, and making space for me too. I think I need to have grace for myself as well. But recognizing that in my heart of hearts, I think everybody's doing their best. But it's not me really. It's my kids. It's your kids. It's everybody that comes, that next generation. And I'm also, listen, I'm not perfect and I'm wrong, and I have a genetic predisposition towards being an asshole. And so I'm trying to curb all of that, and I'm trying to just be grateful. But what you see is what you get, and I'm grateful for that, and I'm grateful for you guys. I appreciate your words, and it's kindness that you're giving me, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Greg. I mean, this has been an amazing conversation. Just thank you so much for joining us today. I do have to, I think, because of the abrupt ending of the main podcast, I'm gonna have to record an additional introduction real quick. I don't think you have to stick around for that, but just thank you for coming to the Red Nation podcast, and thank you for sharing your experiences as an artist and as and just as an indigenous person having an American experience, which we all relate to, and is the experience that brought us all here and brought us all to the work, and really propels us to want to achieve that sense of dignity for ourselves, our families, our people, our nations. And you know i I do have a level of appreciation for all of the and please don't take this in any kind of way, but like the lone wolves out there who are out there not necessarily part of an organization, or want to claim the title, activists, but who are very much part of the work, and very much pillars that hold us up. And I appreciate that so much, and it really, again, it's rev fuel. So thank you. Kaya, do you have closing words?
Keep doing what you're doing, man. I think you talk about your age and stuff. You don't know what you're doing. Does anybody really know what they're doing? If anything, if anything, you just give me inspiration. It's not too late for me to revive that musical passion. Maybe in 10 years you'll be listening to my band. Just kidding. But yeah, cool. Thank you, Aaron.
Appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Greg. All right. Well, we'll see you next time, and maybe we'll go out to Denver. Who knows? But safe times, and just keep on keeping on, man. Thank you.